Hey everybody, welcome back to KevinWilsonSBC. It's great to talk with you today. I had a call with someone the other day and we had a session on leaf springs and how to set up a leaf spring car. So I figured this would be a great opportunity to talk today about leaf springs and drag racing. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys for all the support you're giving my channel. I'm excited about the chalkboard series and continuing these sessions on drag race suspensions, not just the rear end, but also the front end. We're going to be talking more about front end and front end setup here very soon. So thank you for subscribing. Please hit the little bell icon and you will get notified as I release new videos. And once again, thank you for following along at SamsonPerformance.com on our website where we have remote suspension tuning packages. We also have our Facebook page with Kevin Wilson SBC and Samson Performance and Sam's Alignment in Charleston, South Carolina. So many avenues to follow us, but our main outreach to you guys is YouTube. So thank you for all your support. Leaf spring suspensions absolutely work on drag cars. I want to talk today about two very common leaf spring setups, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff I already have on the chalkboard here from a previous personal session I did. But this all applies. Two main setups I want to talk about. I want to talk about the Caltracs bar or the slide-a-link bar, depends on what manufacturer you're working with. I'm not sponsored by any of these manufacturers. I'm not sponsored by anyone. So I have no sponsorship in any of this, but please check the description of my YouTube videos. I always have lots of information in the description. I have links, I have product links, I have definitions, I have a lot of good stuff in there. So let's talk about the Caltracs bar from Calvert Racing specifically, and let's talk about a leaf spring rear end with ladder bars or 4-link. And let's cover those two scenarios today, and I think you'll be able to tie more pieces together for a leaf spring rear suspension. Let's jump in. One of the first main principles on a leaf spring rear suspension setup is the leaf spring itself. Go figure. I highly recommend you get with a reputable leaf spring company that has a focus on drag racing, and spec out a mono leaf spring or a split mono leaf spring. I'm not going to go into all the details today. You can get with them. They can go into the details, but it's very important that we are not trying to do this with a stock spring setup, especially with springs that have stacked springs. I'm not interested in trying to tune that. I'm more interested in a drag race spring setup. They can work with you on the spring rate and what kind of weight you're trying to support on your car. But get with them and let's purchase a good mono leaf spring or split mono spring for your car. That's number one. Second thing I want to highly recommend is that you run a rear slider. I want your rear spring mounted in a slider. So here's the front of the vehicle going that way. Here's the rear of the vehicle. Here's your rear spring perch. I want it to be able to slide forward and backwards as the car needs it to. We're trying to not bind up this leaf spring any more than we have to. I want the leaf spring to be able to work in the rear freely, which is why the slider comes into play. The downside of the slider is it does make noise. If you're trying to drive your car street, you're trying to cruise on the street, as you hit bumps and railroad tracks, you're going to hear noise back here. I don't want any rubber bushings anywhere in my drag cars if I can help it. I'm not after a quiet ride. I'm after performance. I'm after controlling that car. I'm after going fast, straight, and doing it safely. So a rear slider is critical for the rear of your leaf spring. As you twist that leaf spring, as you hit that car, I want this spring to be able to go forward and rear as it needs to. So leaf spring and rear slider. The next piece of this is, are you going to run ladder bars or 4-link, or do you want to stay more on the stock appearing side and go with what Calvert Racing sells as known as a Caltracs bar. Moroso sells a slide-a-link bar. They're going after the same thing. Probably 90% of the market out there, when you talk about leaf springs, within the first 45 seconds, Calvert Racing is going to come up. Calvert Racing is going to come up with springs, sliders, and Caltracs bars. This Caltracs bar is a very strong, and I prefer a chrome moly bar, but at the end of the day you have a bracket that bolts under the spring perch, and it has a bolt hole in it for this bar to bolt down on the rear end. And you notice we already have a good spread down from the axle center line here, so we have a good spread down for the bottom bar. And at the front of the leaf spring we have this pivot bracket, and your front leaf spring bolts through the bracket, and this bracket is free to twist and rotate around the leaf spring. You don't want that bracket bound up. As a matter of fact, on the leaf spring setup, you want the rear and the front of the leaf spring to be loose, and not loose, but you want it to work. You don't want everything bound up so tight nothing works. So you have this front bracket that bolts through the eye bolt of the front bushing, and your bar has two holes that it can mount to. We're going to talk more about those in a minute. And then the top piece of the bar rides and sits just above the leaf spring when you first install it. And this leaf spring, whenever you hit your car and it twists and that wheel drives forward, so you have the twist and the driving forward, your leaf spring is literally trying to make an S. It's waving and just getting all distorted. And what happens is that spring gets so distorted, it reaches its limit, it snaps back, and then the spring pressure and the rear end torque pushes it back up into this distortion and snaps back, and then what you get is wheel hop. So you have a rear end that just cannot control the tire, and you have wheel hop. So we're trying to eliminate all of this spring distortion and put that energy to drive the car forward. So this bracket comes in and rotates around and sits on this spring, and then you can load that spring 1 to 2 to 3 flats and get your car set up. So let's talk a little bit more about the preload side of a leaf spring suspension. You have to, or you're generally going to want to, preload your Caltracs bars. And Calvert Racing does an amazing job with their instructions on telling you how to set the car up and put the car at ride height. And you want just like a small amount of space, like a dime's width of space, where this bar is not touching the leaf spring on both sides. Then what they want you to do is they want you to lengthen this bar until this pinch point touches the leaf spring on both sides. You get it touching the leaf spring on both sides. Then what they want you to do is load each side 1 to 2 flats evenly. And that's where you want to go out and start. So you want both left and right rear preloaded. After you touch the spring, you want to go about 2 flats more on both sides. And what that's going to do is that's going to add some reaction into that hit. You're not having to hit the rear end and take up space before you catch that leaf spring and get that leaf spring under control. You've already got tension, just a little bit of tension on that leaf spring, and when you hit that rear end, you're not wasting any energy to catch up to the leaf spring. When this thing twists and drives forward, this Caltracs bar is already loaded on the leaf spring, and that energy is pushing the car forward, and your instant center is driving the car forward. In this example, here's your anti-squat line. Every car, regardless of what kind of rear setup it has an anti-squat line. It has a neutral line. So I don't care what rear end you're running, what setup you're running, you have an anti-squat line. Generally on a leaf spring car, with a Caltracs system, it's going to separate, and it's going to separate strong. So you have 2 mount holes on this bottom bracket on most of the systems. Not all systems do. Some guys make custom brackets and they have 1, but talking about the Caltracs setup, you have 2 mount holes for that bar to go to at the front of the spring purge. If you need to add bite, you're going to move the bar up to the hole closest to the spring. If you need to take bite away from your car, you're going to move the bar down to the hole further away from the spring. All you're doing is changing your instant center height. You're either getting further away from the anti-squat line. If you're already above the anti-squat line, when you go up, you're adding more anti-squat. When you go down, you're putting less anti-squat in the rear end. Those are the 2 main adjustments you have with a Caltrac bar. Now, you can drill another hole here and move that bar up. At this point, you're leaving what they recommend, but there's nothing that says you can't manufacture your own brackets that are the right strength and change this location here. Generally, we've never done that. On a Caltracs setup, one of those 2 locations with the right preload and the right spring with sliders, the rear end is going to work. It's going to plant that slick. You still have a double adjustable shock back here. I still talk with racers today who are still doing all this with single adjustable shocks, and more power to you. But I tell every one of them, please, please, please try to save some money and invest in the correct pair of double adjustable shocks. I will help you. Let's make sure you get the right shock travel. Let's make sure you have the right installed height for your application. But you should be running double adjustable shocks. So we can still use the shock to help slow down and assist what the rear end is already going to do when it gets hit and it goes through the twisting motion on the launch. So you got your double adjustable shocks, you got your Caltrac bar, you got the top mount hole to add bite, you got the bottom mount hole to take bite away of a spring of the leaf spring rear end. You got your slider, you got everything pivoting and everything's free to move. You got your double adjustable shocks, we got our slicks, we got air pressure, we got ride height. If we lower the car, we're going to lower the intersect point even more. So all the same principles apply, that everything we've talked about. It's just a little different mechanism on what we're doing here. Let's change gears now and talk about leaf spring setup with ladder bars. I've said in some previous videos, we have built a lot of fast leaf spring cars over my entire life. I would say 20% of them are running Caltrac bars, 80% or even a little more were all running ladder bars. A couple were 4 links, but predominantly a ladder bar system with a leaf spring absolutely positively works. However, there's one major difference. On a Caltracs system, this lower bracket and this arm is tied and bolted to the rear end housing. There's no slipping there. We want everything solid mounted, so when that rear end twists, I want all of this moving and acting and that force pushing on that Caltrac bar. It's not the case on a ladder bar setup for a leaf spring. We're going to run what's called a rear housing floater. Here again, this will be in the description. But a rear housing floater is going to allow that mono leaf spring to support the weight of the vehicle, support the car, but it's going to allow the rear end as it twists to slide and float along that spring. I'm not trying to put a bend or trying to use that spring to create a 4-link system with the upper mount hole and the bottom bar, imaginary. I'm actually trying to just let the spring support the weight of the car, and on the hit, when the rear end twists and the wheel drives forward, I'm going to drive the chassis with the ladder bars. and the ladder bar mounts on the rear end. So when you're running a ladder bar, or 4-link for that matter, with a leaf spring, one major difference is we can still run the rear slider, and I recommend it. Everything is solid mounted, no rubber bushings anywhere in any of our cars. We run a rear housing floater, so the leaf spring is able to float under the rear axle, the housing axle, and as the rear end twists and drives forward, the ladder bar is going to take that energy and apply it to the chassis and drive the car forward. No longer are we relying on a Caltrac bar to have the push point and load the spring to keep it from being distorted. We are now using a 4-link system just like you would in a coilover rear end, but instead of having coil springs on your shocks, you have a leaf spring supporting the weight of the car and working with your double adjustable shock. So a very strong decision to make between Caltrac bars or ladder bar setups. And that's generally your preference. Both of them work great. And there are plenty of 7-second quarter model cars running leaf springs with a Caltrac type setup on their car. If you need to move weight around, let's say you have a leaf spring car with a Caltrac setup or a Slide-A-Link setup, and let's say on the launch your car drives left. What you would do, assuming both Caltracs are preloaded the same, so remember the directions talk about getting them loaded the same, you would come to the left rear. If your car's driving left, you would lengthen the left rear bar to preload this spring more. You would go 1 to 2 flats, and that's going to add weight to this left rear and help take some of the left drive out of the car. Just the opposite is true. If the car is driving right, you're going to go to the right rear and you're going to preload the right rear more to put more bite in the right tire to help straighten the car out. That's a critical part of these Caltrac bars. 99% of everyone will tell you, don't try to go to the racetrack and launch a car without having some preload on left and right rear. You don't want to have to waste motion getting this bolt or this bar to touch the spring. Whenever you make the hit, you want the spring loaded a little bit already so that all the energy is pushing the chassis forward, planting the slick, and driving the car down the track. Let's bring this to a close and summarize leaf spring suspensions. In conclusion, leaf spring rear suspensions absolutely work. When you do the right things, you set it up the right way, you understand your car's anti-squat line, and you understand what these components are doing and how they plant your slick or radial or how they don't, and how your double adjustable shocks still work the same way. The compression knob does the same thing. If you put more positive compression clicks in, it makes the compression stroke tighter and tighter. If you put more rebound positive clicks in, it makes the extension tighter and tighter. So the shock doesn't know what kind of rear end you're running. It just understands when force is applied, what resistance is it giving. So with that in mind, one of the first things we talked about for leaf springs is getting with a reputable leaf spring company with a focus on drag racing and having them spec out a mono single or mono split leaf spring for your car. Let them help you get the right weight, the right height, and everything set up. They are pros at this. Once you have the leaf spring selected, I want you to really consider a rear slider for the rear mount of your leaf spring to allow the leaf spring to operate forward and back. We don't want the leaf spring bound up at any point, so you want to allow the leaf spring as the rear end twists and drives forward. I want this spring to be able to rotate in its back perch. So we got the leaf spring, we got the rear slider, and then you're going to have to decide on, do you want to run a Caltrac type setup, or are you looking to run ladder bars or a 4-link setup? If you run the Caltrac setup, you're gonna have a bracket that bolt solid to the housing and the spring perch, and the spring and all this is going to work in conjunction with one another. You're going to have a chrome moly bar. You're going to have a bracket on the front spring mount, and it's going to rotate freely and be able to swing like a cantilever. And it's going to have a bar that comes in contact with that leaf spring. And based on how much you extend this bar is how much preload you add to that spring. Now, we also talked about if you want to add bite to a Caltracs system, you're going to move your bar up to the bolt hole closer to the leaf spring, which is going to raise your instant center height. You're going to be adding more anti-squat into the car. If you need to take bite away, you're going to lower the front mount point, and you're going to be taking more anti-squat out of the rear suspension. You're still going to have to run, or you're still going to want to run, double adjustable shocks to control your compression and rebound. You still want to be able to dial in compression and rebound separately with double adjustable shocks. If you choose to not run a Caltracs system, but you want to stay with your leaf spring, you can definitely run a 4-link or ladder bar setup on the rear. We see a lot of leaf spring ladder bar cars. We built a lot of leaf spring ladder bar cars, but there's no reason why you can't run a leaf spring and 4-link system. The difference is on a 4-link or ladder bar setup with leaf spring, you really need to run rear end axle floaters so that the spring supports the weight of the car, but you're not trying to use the spring to create an instant center point. You're using your ladder bar mount point to control the instant center height and the instant center location with your front mount point on the ladder bar setup. Hope this made sense, guys. The leaf spring system's been around a long time. It's not as popular as a coilover system or a lot of stuff that we run today, but it absolutely works. If you have a leaf spring car and you're wanting to get more serious with it, and you're wanting to apply more power with it, but you don't want to go out and do all this back half work, you can absolutely get with a reputable company like Calvert Racing. You can get your spring purchased, you can get your sliders, you can get your Caltracs system set up, and you can follow their directions to load the springs appropriately, and you can have a rear suspension that applies plenty of bite and will get your car functioning a lot better than in stock spring form. Remember, we're trying to eliminate all this spring distortion as this rear end twist. And yes, you can run a slapper bar or a traction bar setup. That's better than not running anything at all. But if you're going to take the time to do that, let's go a little further. Let's set up the Caltrac bar. Let's see if we can convert over to a mono leaf or mono split leaf spring and really get you some bite going in the rear end of this leaf spring car. Thank you for watching this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. I'm excited about doing more chalkboard sessions. We're going to be talking more about alignments on drag cars, front end. We're going to be talking about front end double adjustable shocks, front end rise, and how that impacts everything on the hit. So thank you for watching, and let's remember we're trying to accomplish 3 things. We're trying to go fast, we're trying to go straight, and we're trying to be safe.